Hello everyone, welcome to History and Culture. Viewers of historical dramas about the Qing imperial court may be deeply impressed by the fierce rivalry and intrigue among the concubines in the harem. However, the most numerous group in the palace were not the concubines, princes, or princesses, but the often overlooked palace maids and eunuchs. Although they usually appear as mere background characters, their lives were far more complex than what is depicted on screen. In Qing dynasty historical dramas, palace maids often seem to be doomed to punishment. For instance, when they anger a noble or a concubine, they may receive a slap, which is already considered a mild punishment. In more severe cases, a careless mistake could lead to being beaten to death with a staff. Although such plots are somewhat exaggerated, they do reflect the low status and harsh lives of palace maids in the ancient royal court. As the saying goes, art comes from life, but is higher than life, so what was the real life of a palace maid like in ancient China? For example, there are rumors that palace maids had to sleep with their legs together, lying on their sides, and could not place their hands anywhere freely. Is this true? What stories lie behind this? According to historical scholars, in ancient China, palace maids, also known as gongyi, were women selected to serve the emperor and his family in the palace, similar to the role of maids or female slaves. Originally, palace maids came from prisoners of war and slaves. In other words, they were women captured by the victorious side after a war between two nations. During the Han Dynasty, the source of palace maids changed, and they were mostly selected from the common people. There were special personnel responsible for background checks, selecting young girls from families with clean records and good looks to enter the palace. Among these girls, a few might even have the opportunity to become part of the emperor's harem, thus changing the course of their lives. By the time of the Qing dynasty, the method and range of selecting palace maids had changed significantly. This was also the period when the well-known selection of beauties system emerged. In the Qing dynasty, women who could enter the palace were mainly divided into two categories: xiaonu, selected beauties, and gongnu, palace maids. Although the two terms differ by just one character, their status was vastly different. Xiaonu were selected through a series of rigorous processes and had the chance to become concubines or even the empress, while palace maids served primarily in a subservient role and had little chance of entering the harem. After the Qing army took control of the Central Plains and established their rule, they implemented the Eight Banners system to consolidate their power. The Eight Banners system was exclusive to the Manchu nobility. According to the system, the upper three banners were controlled by the emperor, while the lower five banners were managed by princes and nobility. Xiaonu were usually the daughters of officials from the upper banners, with noble origins, and had the chance to be selected as concubines or wives of royal family members. The selection of Xiaonu began with the reign of Emperor Xuanzhi, who selected young women from the eight banner families to be his concubines. This practice was passed down through the generations and became a system in the Qing palace. On the other hand, palace maids typically came from the lower ranks of the inner court and were of lower status. Even within the inner court, there were various classes. Palace maids were generally chosen from the lower ranks of the baoi, who were part of the banner system. Once they entered the palace, they served as servants, working in the various palaces. Although there was a slim chance for some to become concubines of the emperor, this opportunity was rare. Regarding the lives of palace maids, due to their low status, they generally lived in poor conditions. Even if they lost their lives due to a mistake, it was unlikely anyone would investigate or care deeply. In the feudal society, the hierarchical social system was strictly enforced, especially within the palace. Not only palace maids and eunuchs, but even the noblewomen and concubines had to adhere to this strict hierarchy. Once a palace maid entered the palace, her first task was to bathe and cut her hair. Ancient Chinese people believed that the body, hair, and skin are a gift from one's parents and would not easily cut their hair. This indicates the low status of the palace maid. She had almost no rights or freedom. After entering the palace for half a year, there is a kind of pre-job training similar to what we have before starting a modern job. This training is provided by the older women in the palace, called mama, who teach the rules and etiquette of palace life. However, this teaching is very different from modern-day classroom instruction. Most of the mamas in the palace are very powerful and opportunistic, treating people based on their status. For the new palace maids, they won't receive any kind treatment. It's common to go without food for a few meals as punishment. And physical abuse is not uncommon. These young maids have no choice but to endure it. After enduring this for half a year, they are assigned to various tasks in different parts of the palace. Generally, these maids do receive a small salary every month, but there is no fixed amount. The salary is entirely at the discretion of their masters. Some particularly favored maids, who win the affection of their masters, may save up a substantial amount of money after leaving the palace at around the age of 25. However, most maids can only save a small sum to live on during their old age. And after leaving the palace, they often face a difficult life. In addition, these maids face constant restrictions in their daily lives. As for their food and living arrangements, they have no choice but to follow the palace's arrangements. Several maids usually share a single room, meaning they must sleep in an orderly manner. If they move too much in their sleep, they might bump into someone, so they are often required to sleep tightly. Sometimes even lying on their sides or keeping their legs close together to avoid disturbing others. Furthermore, the mamas pay close attention to the maids' sleeping posture, training them to form body habits that will help them serve their masters later. This is especially important for situations when their masters need assistance during the night. Maids must be alert and ready at all times. Even when on night watch, they must maintain strict discipline. Any carelessness would be seen as a great disrespect to their masters. So mamas use various methods to ensure the maids sleep in ways that will allow them to wake up quickly when needed. Once the maids finish their tasks, they are not allowed to wander around. If caught, they face severe punishment. In ancient times, with medical knowledge being rudimentary, even a minor cold could be fatal. When a maid fell ill, she did not receive treatment like the emperor's consorts. Instead, she could only ask the Imperial medical department for some medicine to ease her symptoms. Sick maids were also not allowed to reduce their workload. Despite being unwell, they had to continue with their daily tasks. Therefore, many historical dramas about the palace, particularly those set in the Ming dynasty, accurately depict scenes where maids are beaten or verbally abused. To ensure that maids obeyed the rules, severe punishments were imposed. Under these harsh conditions, both the eunuchs and maids lived in constant fear. Of course, as long as they didn't commit a major offense, they wouldn't lose their lives. But they often had to endure humiliation and suffering. Furthermore, there was a hierarchy among the maids. Higher-ranking female officials had much better treatment, while ordinary maids had the lowest status and worst conditions. It is also worth mentioning that the young women selected to enter the palace were at the prime of their youth. But they spent these precious years hidden away in the depths of the palace. Here, they would experience some of the most important years of their lives, but these years were far from glorious or happy. Generally speaking, women above the age of 13 were eligible for selection as palace maids. If a girl entered the palace at the age of 13, she would have to stay there until she was at least 25 or even 30 before being allowed to leave. For women in ancient China, 25 was considered quite late to be unmarried. In ancient times, a girl would reach her coming of age at 15, which meant she had reached the age to marry. And her family would begin preparing for her marriage. If a girl was still unmarried at 20, she would be considered an old maid. However, most palace maids would leave the palace after the age of 25. Far beyond the ideal age for marriage. At this point, even though they were not married, it was very difficult to find a suitable husband. Most maids would end up marrying someone only acceptable, while many others, with no one willing to marry them, would rely on their meager savings from the palace and live their remaining years in loneliness. As a result, the later years of most palace maids were often miserable. After years of exhausting labor in the palace, they suffered from numerous ailments. These diseases were often left untreated, and as they aged, their conditions worsened. With no children and most of their family members gone, they spent their final years in pain and solitude, until they quietly passed away. Some historians have commented that in feudal society, everyone was tightly bound by invisible chains of status, living under the shadow of their social rank. For palace maids, their lives were devoid of dignity, and they could only endure in silence under constant oppression. Fortunately, today we live in a new era, one where we can pursue equality and freedom. This is the History and Culture channel. Liking and subscribing are the greatest help and support to us. Thank you everyone and see you in the next time.